Hello and welcome to our review of the debate of the century, between Flint Dibble and Graham Hancock on the Joe Rogan Experience podcast. Today I'm joined, as ever, by my co-host Andy Brockman, but also the wonderful Kara Cooney, who's agreed to offer a third perspective on this event. I guess before we dive into actually talking about the Joe Rogan Experience episode in detail, I'm going to give you both an opportunity just to lay out some overarching thoughts, I guess. So, since you're our guest, Kara, do you want to go first? And obviously introduce yourself to people who don't know you at home.
Sure. Thank you. Thanks so much, Marc. Thank you so much, Andy. Sorry about my voice. I'm at UCLA, which is under police occupation, and I have done a lot of talking in the last weeks. And now our graduate students have voted to go on strike in opposition to police brutality and unsafe labor conditions. And so it's a very exciting time to be on an American campus. So that's why my voice is pretty much gone. But I did make it my way through the Dibble Hancock debate while shopping and wandering around. And there was a moment where I was eating a lovely ramen. If you don't know Japanese ramen, like really good ramen, there's one right around the corner from my house. And I was also slurping ramen during the debate. So I didn't watch all of the PowerPoints. You know, they're like, can I, Jamie, give me my
give me the HDMI. Yeah.
Give me my HDMI. That was like drawing swords, which is really funny. So I kind of missed a lot of that, but listened to what they were saying. And I took some notes, but just and I can discuss those notes in more detail. But in short, I found the white supremacy argument extraordinary and fits with so much of what we're going through in the United States with charges of anti-Semitism when anyone criticizes Israel, such that when anyone criticized the Hancock argument with the white supremacist counter arguments, it was a woe is me, I am being oppressed, how dare you, victimization sort of discussion, which I found very on point for what we're going through right now, with any criticism of Israel being seen in an immoral light. Morality, of course, not really being what is right and wrong, but what generally serves those in power. And I also had a lot of problems. You know, Flint is brave he's amazing to go in there and take on this almost 5-hour discussion and to be really tag teamed by 2 against 1. I found that rather extraordinary that he was able to take that on. However, you can't fight people who want to believe in mythologies. And there's nothing wrong with believing in mythologies. There was one point where Hancock said, oh, it might even be called mysterious, wouldn't you say? As if the explanation for everything is a mystery, is something that we cannot see. And if that's the way you're going to go after a discussion, then don't put it into the realm of science. It's like watching a believer of Christianity in the literal sense try to prove that they can find Pharaoh's army under the Red Sea. And that to me is very frustrating, and I don't understand why we would do that. So I would have countered these arguments in a different way. However, I understand that what Flint Dibble was trying to do, he was trying to get it point for point, working with the audience that he knew would be listening to Joe Rogan. And for that, I do appreciate his work on this. But I'll leave it there. I have more to say, but please, Andy, you go ahead.
Thanks, Kara. I mean, a lot of things there I'd absolutely be with you on. Again, given the viewing figures we had for our previous interview with Flint Dibble, in fact, I'll introduce myself briefly as well, because although I've been Marc's partner in archaeological thought crime, as Marc said, my name's Andy Brockman. I'm a trained archaeologist. I've got a master's in archaeology, but my particular interest is the archaeology of modern conflict and maritime and heritage crime. But in this case, I'm actually most interested in the Graham Hancock theories, the Graham Hancock experience in the Joe Rogan Experience, that whole debate really is a cultural event rather than an archaeological event. And I've got a particular interest in conspiracy theory and exploring these kind of ideas. I actually wrote a book a couple of years ago with my late colleague Tracy Spate called The Buried Spitfires of Burma, which was all about a modern myth and how it gained so much traction in the media that it was eventually endorsed by the British Prime Minister. So I think there are lots of reads across in many of these stories, and I hope we'll get a chance to explore those in this conversation. But as I say, I'm not so much looking at refuting Graham Hancock's theories about Yonaguni or whatever, or Gunung Padang, so much as what it actually tells us about ourselves and the debates and the stories that we have within our own communities today.
I suppose for my part, I would say, first of all, anyone watching this who has seen other coverage of, and indeed our previous coverage in talking to Flint as a sort of an after-action report from him, have probably seen in the comments or thought themselves that initially people seem to be quite arrogant when it comes to talking about Hancock and his ideas. I hasten to say hypotheses, not theories. But in that sense, I want to just really emphasize here, in previous conversations about this topic, I've always been very careful, and I think Andy has as well, to say, look, if there's evidence of something, then we'll consider it. You've got to be a good scientist. You've got to be led by evidence. To be a good journalist, you've got to be led by evidence. And regardless of whatever hat Hancock is claiming to wear at any given time, depending on the goalpost he's wanting you to aim at, I think he fails on both those standards. So I'm not patronizing him. I'm not name calling him, but I'm saying based on his claims, if he wants to be taken seriously, then one has to also take what he's saying seriously, and therefore actually the value of that evidence that he's presenting. For me, I'm also going to say something which, compared to some other people's coverage of this, and also just general archaeological social media conversation around this discussion that unfolded on Joe Rogan's podcast. I'm going to, something which is a different tone, and that is to say, I don't think Flint did an amazing job. It was 4.5 hours meandering, chasing the other guy round the globe, and I've said this to Andy before, and also actually I think I emailed Kara about this. Essentially, being drawn into a conversation about whether or not the moon is made of cheese, figuratively speaking, in so many ways, tackling the fundamental central premise of how pseudo-archaeology works. And it's interesting as well for folks, again, just on that notion of how people talk about Hancock and the tone of Hancock. It's interesting that even Hancock, towards the end of that debate himself, says, so are you going to now back off on pseudo-archaeology? Oh, so you are a pseudo-archaeologist then, Graham, are you? He himself, as I say, moves and changes his hat depending on where he feels strongest. And so I don't feel that actually this was the death blow. I've seen some people say, one prominent archaeology YouTuber said, and Atlantis is dead. No, it's not gone away. And I suppose the question is, what happens next? This is something that I know that Andy's been interested in. Is you cannot stake a zombie or maybe a vampire possibly. Just in one go and walk off and presume it's been dealt with. But also as well, I think there's room for pluralism. I think, as Kara alluded to just a little bit before, there is room for approaching this as mythology, as folk belief. And that is something that archaeology does accommodate. So, again, we'll get into this in more detail. But I suppose, where shall we start? I mean, did we think that the venue was a good one? Did we think that this was the place to have this rumble in the jungle, this debate of all debates? Kara, do you want to open on that?
I mean, you're going to have the biggest audience there possible.
So, there's really no choice. And it's a place where fame precedes anything else. It's a very American venue, right? So I think it was perfect in that way. And then all of the dueling HDMI thumb drives was pretty interesting, and shows, as you say, that Flint Dibble was fighting fire with fire rather than transcending this discussion. He was working with somebody who is indeed trying to prove their mythology with evidence and trying to prove their pre-civilization, and I'm using that word in scare quotes as we so often do, but his pre-civilization reality with evidence, very much like a Christian literalist would be trying to prove that they have found Pharaoh's army at the bottom of the Red Sea. And you can't fight that fire with fire. You must transcend it. You can't say, well, it's not there, which Flint tried to do again and again, because then the answer was always, there are this many miles unexplored. There are this many square meters unexcavated. And how dare you say that these things can't be possible? So you walk into the trap of, oh, it could always still be there. And 2 points I'll say where I thought Flint, where I would have had a different answer. Maybe in the moment sitting in Joe Rogan's studio, I would not have, because what an intimidating setting, right?
Yeah.
But number one, when Flint is defending academia, which we all know sucks. So at least as an Egyptologist who write hypothetical histories and try to go out on more Marxist limbs discussing power in my field, and can have sometimes been excoriated for making ancient history political, and how dare you do such things. I know how academia can react when somebody is trying to do something different. So, and I've seen Nicholas Reeves be excoriated by his own field for doing nothing more than using evidence to come up with a brilliant theory of a tomb behind a tomb. Yeah. And so to say that archaeologists are always going to go with the evidence, and that, yeah, there's Massels out here, that was his answer, fine. But I think talking about the academy as interested in the status quo and maintaining its power status for those at the top and the boomers at the top, the white men at the top, I think is essential. Yeah. And I think he did miss that point, and it was an easy trap for him to walk into, which I found problematic.
Well, as an Egyptologist, have you not wanted to vacuum up the entire Sahara?
and he never once said, well, he kind of did, that archaeology leaves things for the next generation, et cetera, et cetera. You know, that was implied. But this idea that, you know, just because you haven't done the work, it can't, this idea that something new couldn't be discovered. And he should have, I think, said, discoveries are always possible. Of course, these discoveries are possible.
It's literally the point of archaeological investigation.
It is literally the point. And so to same it out was I think it put him on the back foot, and I had an issue with that. And then the other problem was to not try to transcend these details, and to not try to, like, whenever an image was put up and it was like, doesn't this look like this? There was a lot of visual examination. Doesn't this look like it could be man-made? Doesn't this look like it could be a work tool by human hands? And there was so much conjecture in there, and very little discussion of how you would actually prove that something was like that. And I, you know, he's like, I'm not a geologist. He said it a couple of times, but I would have appreciated a little bit more. And I think maybe going into that room, I'm actually arguing now for more of a hard scientific edge, which I wouldn't have necessarily been able to bring. He doesn't know what kind of evidence Hancock is necessarily going to show from his recent underwater explorations. But fissures and straight lines they happen everywhere all the time.
Yeah.
This is not unusual. But I was struck by how much Joe Rogan would go, but that looks to me, this looks, that looks. Yeah. And that was really frustrating, because a lot of things look like a lot of things.
Yeah. I mean, the lamp behind me looks like it could be burning oil. It's not. Andy, what do you think about the venue in that sense, and I suppose the premise, I guess, the conceit of this particular debate?
Yeah, I mean, and again, not to give away too many trade secrets, but we off camera we had a lot of discussion about what the Joe Rogan Experience actually is, and was it even a podcast?
It is a podcast,
and how the definition of what a podcast is has been changing. I was watching a video last night of one of Britain's leading podcast producers, who was talking about how in the last 18 months, they've shifted from audio to audio plus video, because that's where they've had to follow the audience. And so I think, just as a cultural event, I think audiences of low two-figure millions, terrestrial traditional media companies would die for these days. Certainly the BBC and Channel 4 and ITV in the UK would. So you can't dismiss these things as unimportant, first of all. So I think it's absolutely right that archaeologists engage with that kind of audience, and absolutely all credit for to Flint Dibble for putting his head above the parapet and going into that room, going into that studio. And he was very frank, certainly in our talk and elsewhere, about the personal health issues he's had in the run up to that. So again, under that pressure as well, all credit. I think just on the Joe Rogan experience itself, and again, I'm up until this moment, because it hadn't really crossed into my realm of experience. I'm not a Joe Rogan viewer, or haven't been a Joe Rogan viewer. Members of my extended family are. He has got that reach into popular culture, obviously, both sides of the Atlantic. And I think I absolutely I agree with Kara that yes, he was partisan. What I would say, that coming to it fresh, he was far less partisan than I thought he was going to be. And there were times when he appeared to be shocked, or at least taken aback, and then convinced to the extent he was reinforcing the point or following up the point rather than trying to bury the point. When Flint Dibble came up with a piece of evidence to counter Graham Hancock's assertions. So, I think although it might not meet the BBC's criteria for balance, it was a lot more of a debate than perhaps I thought it might be when I sat down to watch it. I think the other thing, obviously the length is important. It's as we're doing here, we've got an open-ended format where we'll talk around the subject and it'll probably reach a natural conclusion. And then we'll say thank you very much. No, it won't be four. No, dear
Thank
viewer.
you.
No one deserves that.
Absolutely, we've all got better things to do. But no, I think obviously that kind of format is a new one for the Academy. It's the kind of thing maybe that you'd have in the senior common room over port after dinner in the old days, where people would sit and chew the fat and stick daggers in each other's backs, metaphorically, in a classic academic feud. But nowadays, you can have these discussions in public, in HD, on YouTube, or other platforms are available. And I think for us who would identify as archaeologists, academics, journalists even, and I sort of straddle all three, we have to engage with these issues on the current terms. We can't pretend things haven't changed. We can't pretend that everything, archaeology exists in an academic journal of record behind a paywall anymore, because it doesn't, and arguably shouldn't. But yeah, I think ultimately though, I would say that, as I said at the outset, I think I see this as more of a cultural event, and I think a couple of things. One is that just by sitting down in that studio, I'm not criticizing him for doing it. I think he should have done it. But I think we all have to address, is that giving Graham Hancock, or rather Graham Hancock's theories,
hypotheses,
more hypotheses. Well, no, hypotheses, theories, they're the same thing. Yeah.
No,
theories, hypotheses, people would use the same those terms. It gives them perhaps more credit than in fact they're due. And I think the other thing is context. What we saw on the Joe Rogan Experience, what we've seen from Graham Hancock since the early 90s, late 80s, early 90s, is a modern version of, if Ignatius Donnelly did a book tour with a Magic Lantern slideshow in the 1840s, 50s, that's what we're seeing from Graham Hancock. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I would be less reticent than maybe Flint Dibble was at calling out fringe grift, actually.
Mm. Can I jump in? Because I think the setting was everything. I think the setting for Joe Rogan, the anti-vaxxer, pro-Trump, populist, political setting was anti-intellectual setting is everything. And walking in there, this is it's a considerable ask, which is why I was disappointed that Flint Dibble decided to fight fire with fire rather than trying to transcend it with something else. But the setting is everything because there is an extraordinary popular interest in archaeology, which needs to be confronted and recognized. And then one needs to ask why. What are all of these people who are mechanics and tarmac workers and working at a pharmacy company? Why are all these people interested in what happened 5,000 years ago, 10,000 years ago? What the hell is going on in modern popular culture that there is this demand that we figure out for once and for all that the Academy has been lying to us and that there's this actual extraordinary reality behind all of the past that you've been lied to. There is at its base in the way we have an anti-vaxxer movement through Joe Rogan, who I do think said you're supposed to take the horse ivermectin, right? I think he pushed some of these things. And, vaccines, I'm ambivalent about the COVID vaccine myself. I think they were rushed out. I have opinions. That's fine. But to be hard anti-vaxxer in a moment of pandemic is, it's a position to take, right? So you have to ask, what is this perspective of anti-authority, not authoritarian, anti-authority, anti-specialist? And the way it's countered is with a very typical American, and dare I say now British, do your own research kind of perspective. Well, I've done my own research. I have looked at the evidence. I have looked with my eyes, and it looks to me as if it is not this or it is that, right? And in the same way that you can do your own research and figure out how to counter COVID, right? This new virus that comes out of China and who the hell knows what it is. It's a kind of, I can fly the plane sort of argument, right? Why do we need any of these specialists to do these things? And so the setting is everything. And that political edge needed to have been recognized by all of us and by Flint Dibble, so that you're in that space. And then you're asking, I think, the very useful question of Hancock and Joe Rogan, why do you care? What are you getting out of this? What do you want from this? What are you hoping for? What does it mean to you? And no one ever asked this question of Graham Hancock or Joe Rogan. What does it mean to you that there was this race of superhuman humans who were able to embed themselves in hunter-gatherer communities and spread their genius wisdom? Why does that matter? And what is it that's behind this that you're trying to get at? And once you have a kind of answer to that, then I would then follow that, because this was an arena of power where Flint was on the back foot in, tag team, double timed in this arena of power. And you need to look at what the power is, what they're trying to counter, and why then they're so angry at academia, at higher education. I'm pretty damn angry at higher education systems right now myself. I think you are in Britain as well. And I think Flint pointed that out, right? And there was this all happy, fuzzy feeling at the end, like, oh my God, they've destroyed archaeology at this Sheffield, program and that department, Sheffield, that was mentioned in particular. And everyone, oh, this is horrible. And what would we do? And we need to support these things. But this was all said, but is that really what this political spectrum wants? Or do they want to pull themselves up by their bootstraps and do their own research and engage in this in that way? So the political arena was this skeptical, anti-intellectual group. Maybe the same kinds of people who would have flayed Hypatia alive. I don't know, maybe that's going too far, but maybe it's not. Maybe it's not.
No, I'd absolutely agree with that. I think we can't divorce this from the political moment on both sides of the Atlantic. We're slightly behind you in the States, I think, in terms of the penetration of the anti-intellectual, anti-vaxxer, populist, alt-right, which endorses
diaper wearing,
any number of fringe theory, from
men wear diapers.
Yeah, I mean, from QAnon to Graham Hancock's theories to the South shall rise again. Yeah, there are any number of these fringe belief systems, these fringe almost where things are set up almost as as creeds. And just one thing, just to finish my just to put it in context in a UK context, and I think that a lot of the reaction I've seen to Flint's appearance on Joe Rogan has been from the British angle, and it's almost, oh my God, this is wonderful. How can an archaeologist do this? And I did put to Flint when I talked to him for Archaeosoup, did he think the fact that he's come from an American cultural background where arguably people are less slow to put themselves forward in front of a camera, was that
a
important?
Factor? Yeah.
Was that a factor? And just to finish, I mean, probably the most high profile media archaeologist in the British media firmament at the moment, apart from Professor Alice Roberts, closely followed up by Raksha Dave, and on the traditional, for want of a better word, the mainstream media and mainstream archaeological and heritage telly, is on GB News, and that's Neil Oliver. And Neil Oliver is absolutely endorsing the anti-vax 15-minute city.
Yeah. He's also very, very much tries to still play up him as an archaeologist as well. He recently released a book, for example, about history, and I think
absolutely he's very deliberately trying to ride both horses. But now I think but the other thing I would say is, because there's a cultural moment, because there are audiences for this. There are audiences for this stuff. There are audiences who will pay for this stuff. Yeah, and that's why I'm not afraid to say, yep, there's grifting going on here.
However,
yeah, but why?
However, what I would say, because I haven't had a chance to answer my own question here about the setting yet. However, what I would say is, first of all, we shouldn't rush to characterize the entire audience. It's millions of people. And the reason why I say that is not because I don't see what you're describing, Kara and Andy, but it's because actually within the comments, for example, on the video, there are people who have genuinely, seemingly had their minds changed. There are people who actually have seemingly had an interesting time with this conversation. And so as potentially hostile an environment as it might have been going into it, it was nonetheless a very, as you said at the beginning, Kara, it was a very audienced environment. And so that's something I guess I would say also, not least just to keep people on side who are actually watching this, so they don't think that we are just characterizing everyone as a certain type of political entity. However,
can I jump in right there? From that perspective, Flint did exactly what he needed to. Yeah. Because he's taking this audience on their terms and answering the questions on their terms, which is something I wouldn't have been able to do. No. And so props to him for being able to do that and be like, here's my evidence, and here's my evidence, and here's my evidence. I wouldn't have done that.
Okay. Well, I'll come back to that in a second. Actually, I think that's possibly the next part of this is, but actually, however, that being said about not tarring everyone with the same brush, there is, I think, an increasingly clear, proven pipeline between the sort of ancient aliens experiment on history TV, the History Channel, and things like QAnon, and the 4chan sphere and other sort of really, when you dig really far down into it, it's actually people seeing what they can get away with in terms of edgy ideas. But then you have other people who sort of take it on as, oh, maybe that's a thing, maybe this is a thing. And actually, I genuinely believe, but also I think it's starting to be shown, this connection between just the ability to have a coffee table book that says everything you know about the past is wrong, opens up the possibility that everything you know about trusted political figures, trusted people in Hollywood, and so on and so forth, trusted people in your family might be wrong. And the reason why I say that is it's interesting that within this environment, you do get figures like Neil deGrasse Tyson, respected astrophysicists, going on their own, not having to debate whether or not astrophysics is real, and being able to present their ideas in a way that is respectful and interesting and interested. And I think that was a carry through that Rogan did have, was that he was open to having, again, points of evidence presented to him. But it's interesting how archaeology has to be debated, whereas astrophysics doesn't. That's interesting to me.
In the United States, astrophysics does indeed have to be debated, because the man who changes my water filter is a flat earther. And when I told him that my husband works in the industry of space, he said, oh, he only thinks he works in the industry of space. And these are the conversations that one can have in the United States right now. But my biggest problem with this discussion is that it is a discussion of ideology, in my opinion. And as Michael Mann, the social historian, says, ideology is the most powerful out of the four social powers of ideological, economic, military, and political powers, because it can be neither proven nor disproven. It is, and in this case, for this audience, and you mentioned QAnon, this is a QAnon adjacent or QAnon not so far kind of discussion. But this kind of ideology allows people, as you say, to manufacture innocence for whatever it is that they need to do or want to do in the United States, whatever it is they want to take or claim as theirs. And we saw this in the United States and still see it with the use of Christianity to maintain power over people of African origin. Even after slavery was made illegal, this is something that was maintained, and Christianity was one of the main tools used to do this. Lots said about master and slave relationships in the Old and New Testaments that are very, very useful from this perspective, and lots of things said about upholding certain status quos despite Jesus's revolutionary stance in the Gospels. You can indeed pick and choose from your ideology what it is that you want to put forward, right?
The rich man in his castle, the poor man at his gate. God made them high and lowly in order to their estate.
But to go into this arena and then take on an ideological discussion, and to not really understand that the ideology is about manufacturing innocence for people who want to smash and grab. That's all it is, in my opinion. You're creating this ideology that gives you the freedom to say, oh, I am of these people, or I am of this belief, and thus I can treat you in a certain way. I can take from you. I can close down your department because you're doing bad things or wrong things or whatever it is. But it's a method of manufacturing power. I want to know more about what that power is. And it's the same way that when they were in the discussion about the pyramids and they're discussing the mathematical things, and they're, Joe Rogan said people were living in them for years before. And I was like, whoa, but no one ever tried to take on why the pyramids were built as an ideological weapon of the mind, which also, Egyptologists don't do that. It still works to this day, and Egyptologists don't like to do that. They still counter things with evidence and facts and this many feet or inches or meters or centimeters. But it's just, I think there were many ways of working with this, but it's what lurks behind it, the agenda that is behind it, that is so very interesting to me.
And it's actually the endless sort of cloud of mystery that enables you to say, I'm just asking questions, or make those claims and sort of subsume monuments and cultures into a broader idea. Yeah, mystery itself is a bigger problem as anything. Andy,
I'm particularly struck by what Kara's just been saying there, because the thing that immediately came into my head, and I'd say it's having watched your previous interviews with Marc as well, and when you were talking about your positioning of Egyptology as a political subject as much as an archaeological subject, which again I'm absolutely with, and the kind of, and I think it's something we as archaeologists
stay in your lane, Andy. Stay in your lane. You're not meant to be talking politics.
This is the problem. We stay in our lane far too often. We stay in our lane.
There is no such thing as apolitical history. There is no such thing as apolitical archaeology.
Exactly.
It doesn't exist.
Well, actually, on that point, I'll let you get back to it, Andy. But on that point,
please,
it's interesting how this notion that isn't it wonderful that someone has stepped up, and how as Andy was saying, some British perspectives have been, how can people possibly get in front of the camera? We've been doing it for a fucking decade. Why is it so revolutionary to so many of our colleagues? And that's something I'm curious about. But say, go on.
So just really fast, Andy, I really do want to hear what you have to say, but just I've been a part of this world of going after ideologies within my own field. So the book I wrote, The Good Kings, is saying I am a recovering Egyptologist. And then I go into this long treatise about how Egyptology has treated these kings as beloved pharaohs, and we are all their groupies, and this must be deconstructed. And the amount of pushback that I got from this, the amount of anger that I received from this from my own field, shows that our field is deeply entrenched in ideology. And all of you have these in Britain, these Egyptophiles, these people who love Egypt more than their own families. And there is power in this. And when someone then comes to them and says, Ramses II was a populist and Akhenaten was using religion in this way as a wedge between these people and these people freak out, and they don't want their pharaohs thus sullied. And then you have to ask yourself, well, what kind of social power are you receiving from treating the pharaohs, and I use this word in scare quotes, in this way? So that's why I keep asking, what power is Hancock and Joe Rogan, what power are they receiving by treating antiquity as this conspiracy of an extraordinary race of superhumans? That this is an honest question, and I would like to puzzle that out.
Absolutely. I think we need to. I mean, just very briefly, the point I was going to make just now was that, and again, it's about maybe archaeologists not being very good at looking at the longue durée, as historians talk about sometimes. I know Kara's talked about that in her previous comments on other interviews and other work. But that for example, thinking about the Great Pyramids and Pyramids of the Giza Plateau, can you draw a line between those and an authoritarian regime like Stalin's Russia in the 1930s and the forced labor building Magnitogorsk? The hydroelectric schemes and so on, that forced industrialization that the Soviet Union underwent between 1920 and 1940. I think we have to ask those questions. We have to try. We have to say these aren't just wonderful objects from the past. They are wonderful objects from the past, but they're much more interesting if you ask why.
But they're also not singular either. The city of Ur existed. People were moving stuff around even in Britain. Obviously, Stonehenge is a very famous example. It's interesting how, again, within the substance of the conversation, certain premises were allowed to propagate, such as, this is completely unique at the time. No one else was ever doing this,
So much of this comes from this mythology of modern exceptionalism, which one would believe the pandemic has since destroyed, and millions of people are dead, and our modernity has not saved us. No. And so this idea that we exist in a space and time in which we, with AI and all of these tools at our disposal, we're able to figure everything out. Bullshit. So such that when you look into the past, you're like, my God, how could people have done these things? This is one of my arguments in The Good Kings and other places, that modern exceptionalism is a myth, that we are still very much living with patriarchal Bronze Age structures. They may be more complicated, there may be more people involved, but there's still Bronze Age patriarchal structures from the agricultural revolution. And what does that mean? And how does one extricate themselves from this in what I hope is a new anti-patriarchal revolution taking root now? But that's
that's where this conversation is happening with groups of people, some of whom we're all existing in this weird modern space of this shit show of smash and grab and billionaires and everyone, trying to do their side hustle so they can pay their rent. But part of society is like, we must move ahead and find something else and break it apart and build from the ruins and do something different. And then there is the society that is the Graham Hancock, Joe Rogan, that is, we must go back to the past and we must find this old way of doing things that can give us innocence for just taking our power in the way that we want to take it. It's in some ways, to me, that simple, this anti-patriarchal experience that's when you get the most anti-abortion laws passed. That's when we're going to make birth control illegal. That's when we're going to have some guy yesterday who stood up at a graduation and said that the best job a woman could have is a homemaker at a Catholic university named Benedictine College. Yes, and yes, the most bombs are thrown right before the armistice is signed, but this is a long durée process that is going to go for hundreds, if not another, I don't know how many years such a revolution is going to take place. But we're existing in a space and time in which patriarchal systems will not function anymore. It is breaking the system. It is destroying the host. It is a parasite that cannot sustain itself. But using the past in this way it does create this innocence of, well, we have this legacy of this superhuman that has told us what it is we need to do. It's a very masculinizing, it's very patriarchal mythology. It's a mythology to help these men feel good about fucking over the world.
It's a very.
I think. So, Marc, go on.
It's a very Victorian, the burden of the civilizing project sort of notion, isn't it? Which is being expressed in a different way. Andy, do you want to say something, and then I have a point about language. Go ahead.
Yeah, the point I was going to make. Kara was talking about patriarchies and men, and it is largely men who are pushing this. Interestingly, isn't it? But
always men.
I Marjorie Taylor Greene.
Yeah, I mean, I've written books about women being tools of the patriarchy. Sure. This is no surprise, and you guys have Maggie Thatcher, Theresa May, and you have another. So it doesn't matter. There's always another.
Liz left
in fact, I think we're in the she's in the process of trying to export herself to you at the moment. Watch the name Liz Truss and then avoid it like the plague.
Oh, wonderful!
She managed to crash our economy in less than 5 weeks. But no, and killed the Queen allegedly. No, the point, the serious point I was going to.
I think the Queen just checked out. She went, "I've had enough of this. I'm going."
Yes. But no, in all seriousness, I think that whatever and however much Graham Hancock protests that he's not racist, that his theories are benign, that he's just trying to promote understanding, we should open our minds to the left field and all the rest of it, preferably by taking large amounts of ayahuasca. But my concern about this for a long time has been that this conspiracy material, these conspiracy constructs, which effectively is what we're talking about, whether it's suppression by big archaeology or the woke or whatever pejorative term people on the right or the very far left want to use. These are sort of gateway drugs that end up in things like the Christchurch mosque shootings and Breivik in Norway, massacring teenagers on that island, and so this is actually pretty serious stuff. And
can I jump in right there and use the word apocalypse, because I do study crisis. This is one of my specializations, the so-called intermediate periods of ancient Egypt. And there is at this moment a real fetishization of apocalypse as this, from a Mad Max movie perspective, where you have your milking women and eating people. I'm thinking of The Road by Cormac McCarthy, an amazing book that you cannot unread. So don't read it unless you're ready for that. But this kind of fetishization of everything going wrong and only we can fix it.
The Walking Dead.
And then Yeah, and then and the zombie apocalypse has now become more real than you can possibly imagine in Los Angeles, the home of the homeless, where we've now made living conditions so unaffordable for our billionaire class that we have a zombie apocalypse. They become homeless, they start doing drugs, and then you just have these people, these undead people walking the streets because it's only one or two uses of Mexican meth will make you psychotic. I mean, this is where we are in society, in my city. But you know, as these men talk about this grand crusade or quest that they are on to prove the truth about this superhuman race of men who seeded their intellect in all of these simple hunter-gatherer groups, so that's the word simple is not necessarily used. They, you know, Hancock and his wife risk their lives, they say, to do this research, right? So when Flint Dibble is like, oh, I have this data and that data, and we did careful archaeological work, and Hancock goes, well, I almost died. And I did this, you know, this amazing underwater exploration.
Flint should have said, bitch, I've had my neck open, like opened up on a hospital table. Yeah. Talk about almost dying.
But this manly apocalyptic sort of way of going about this, it's very Shackleton's expedition.
Yeah. Now, I think a couple of points. So first of all, it's interesting, this connection to Anders Breivik and Christchurch, etc. I think we need to make clear that is in extremis, in so much as if these conversations are not happening in a way which is open to being questioned and to being challenged, then absolutely people can find themselves in some very dark places, without a doubt. Again, of an audience of 6 million people, I'm sure most of them aren't like that, but it is a risk. I just want to come back to this thing of language, though. You've both used, unqualified, the term longue durée, which all three of us know. But again, our audience, or an audience, may not know. And it's interesting how, so to be clear, for folks at home, it's talking about taking a long duration, a long perspective on history, on the story of humanity, and putting essentially any narrative into that sort of human story context. That's more or less what we're talking about.
And I do believe if you want to look further, you can look to Ferdinand Braudel and the Annales school, French school, that talks about history being not just great men moments and yes, there are these punctuated equilibrium moments, but that you have to look at something like the French Revolution or something like the American Civil War from the perspective of hundreds, if not 1,000 years. And it's something where this is a point where Egyptology can really jump in with both feet, because Egyptology provides this gift of 3,000 years, if not more, of ups and downs and invasions and occupations and retractions, contractions. And you can then examine what happens over 300, 400, 500 years in terms of women in power, or in terms of elite power from Upper Egypt, or a deltaic power coming in, or a military industrial complex taking power, and how long that takes to move itself into the kingship, or immigrants coming in as Libyans or sea peoples, and how long it takes for them to get to the pinnacle of power. These things are all possible in our field, which all Egyptology right now is going through its own particularist moment, in which thinkers like Jan Assmann and Eric Hornung are passé. And we are only supposed to deal with this tiny micro evidence and be very particularist. And if you're not dealing with particularist fragments and working with these tiny arguments, you are considered somebody who's hypothesizing too much and making too big a point. So I would say that while we talk about this longue durée as being essential to historical and social and archaeological discussions, I think that in my field, at least, there is a massive political pushback against it. And one has to really fight to hold on to that kind of big history.
But on that point of language, though, and that's not to sort of go, thank you, I'll go back, but yeah, thank you. But on that point of language, this is something that actually we didn't fully pick up on with our interview with Flint. Is that he, and again, this is where I become a bit more critical in that sense. He has been allowed, I think, by many of our colleagues to presume that he succeeded in his quest to have fully appropriate language for the audience. He was using terminology, though, that I would never use in a frankly a university lecture, never mind a public appearance, without giving a definition. It was jargon laden. There was also issues, I think, in terms of what his presentation. I think it was co-authored with a couple of people. Chose to highlight, and what that said about what academic archaeology thinks about the public. So the need to go in with as he described it, pornography with the red figureware vases. The need to reference 420. Hey, we all like weed, don't we, guys? And the number 69. It felt a little bit like someone trying to be cool, and that was unfortunate. But also at the same time, not being so cool as to avoid jargon in a way which actually good academics do try to avoid jargon. I mean, what do we think about that in terms of the quality of presentation and in that sense accessibility?
What words are you thinking about in particular?
Well, things like Pleistocene, for example, Holocene. There's words which can be very quickly described and explained. And between Hancock and Flint, they both knew what those words meant. But again, your audience member, who apparently you're trying to appeal to by saying, "Oh, look, here's an ancient porn trade," doesn't necessarily know what that terminology is without description. I suppose what I'm saying is, were we at risk of a conversation at times moving to just being between two men in the room, as opposed to actually being genuinely laying out ideas in a very accessible way to the public, because
where the HDMI is the penis in the pissing contest.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, but in that sense, because the reason why I say this is that I've seen a few comments on the YouTube public upload for this, and where people have said, "Great, we need to see more of this caliber of academic debate." But actually, often when you look at the threads of that conversation, they're not talking about the quality of what was being said. They're talking about the fact that it sounded like important language. You see what I mean? I'm wondering about, in terms of a communication of ideas, was it an effective 4.5 hours?
Can I come in on that first, Marc? So I'm thinking a couple of things in response to that. One is that I agree with you that talking, as I always call it, talking human, is one of the most important skills anybody who wants to communicate can learn, because unless you just want to talk to one particular niche audience, obviously it's really important to be able to express complex ideas in a way that people can begin to understand. And it's a real skill. Not everybody can master it. Not everybody's comfortable with it. I can think of academic colleagues who feel really awkward if they had to explain the theoretical basis of their work in terms that aren't those of an academic journal or a talk to postgrads.
But even then, a journal article defines its terms and tries to bring. I mean, the day one when I was being taught how to write, it was a case of do not use jargon, even if you know the person you're talking to knows what you mean. I think though that there's actually a more important issue perhaps in looking at this. And again, I'm looking at this as a cultural event rather than as a. Can we just for the audience just clarify what you mean by that? Because I think a couple of phone calls ago with you in preparation for this conversation, I said to you, "Do you mean that it's something along the lines of two characters having a sort of an entertainment battle, so akin to your Muhammad Ali Rumble in the Jungle"?
That's exactly what I mean, and that's exactly why I alluded to the Rumble in the Jungle. If people aren't familiar with it, it's the very famous boxing match between Muhammad Ali and George Foreman, I think it was, wasn't it? In Zaire, the Dust Up in Zaire, as the disco song at the time called it, for the World Heavyweight Championship in the 1970s, and it became a very famous documentary film called When We Were Kings. And I think this particular moment was a coming together of two big beasts in their own particular cultural milieu, in on a stage, a partisan stage, as Kara's explained, but where it wasn't so partisan that the combat wasn't entertaining, as it were. And the chances of this happening again in the near future, with another archaeologist taking on another fringe pseudo-archaeologists, ancient aliens theorists, whatever we're going to call these people, I think the chances of that happening are pretty remote.
Well, I don't know. It's clearly made a lot of ad revenue.
Mm.
Yeah,
but there's only so many times you can say the same thing. I think. Look, just
makes them look better. It makes them look better. It gives this arena more value than it had previously. This is one reason why people don't want to go to Fox News, don't want to go on the Joe Rogan show, because they are giving value to that arena in a way that it did not have previously. So having the archaeologists come on and to have Graham Hancock be able to have this conversation and use words like Pleistocene and what have you, it is a way of giving him more social power than he necessarily had going into it, authenticating it, if you will. So I think it probably will happen again.
I mean, yeah. Given my success in prediction in this area, when I said that the debate between Flint and Graham Hancock wouldn't happen because what did Graham Hancock had only things to lose. He wasn't going to gain a new audience. He could only be made a fool of, and he wasn't. Some people wanted to see.
Well, he had Joe. So I don't think that. And he'd done his homework, and his whole, he's not, what's the other guy, the Dutch dude, what's his name? He's no Von Däniken. He's not Von Däniken, right?
Yeah.
He's trying to thread his needle and maintain some connection to the academic world, which you can see because he's read articles, he's working with their data, he's pulling from their data. So the more he can walk that line between the two worlds, the more power he has. So I would actually say that Flint Dibble coming on his show empowered him, Graham Hancock, rather than the other way around.
And I think this is where, coming at it as a sort of cultural critic. I mean, when I reviewed the Ancient Apocalypse when it came out for the website, and we talked about it on the Watching Brief, and I pulled a quote from an interview profile that Von Däniken did in the 1970s, which is almost identical to language that Hancock uses. I mean, Hancock is absolutely in the lineage of convicted fraudster Eric Von Däniken.
He's just more clever, but he's much more clever. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh no, absolutely.
Yeah.
But for example, can we see our best meme friend Giorgio from Ancient Aliens debating with an archaeologist? I can't. I don't know. Maybe you two do.
He may well have already done something. I don't know. I don't follow him his activities. Who knows? But in that sense, I don't feel as though Giorgio would feel the need to. In that sense, I think Hancock, as Kara alludes to, does get something from this, but just I mean, to be clear, I don't think that's a reason not to engage. You see what I mean? In the same way, I don't think that
I agree.
I also don't think that being concerned about the fact that there is false information out there on the internet is a reason not to have a social media presence as an academic, for example. But I suppose this thing of the moving of the goalposts was fascinating for me as well, because actually, in recent newspaper interviews surrounding the Netflix series, Hancock, I think in The Guardian, might have been the Sunday edition, The Observer, was saying something like, it's so annoying that people are out there talking about aliens. I mean, like, it's so they're really not doing our work justice, and yet Hancock's own milieu, his own back catalogue, actually has references to potential sculptures on Mars.
Well, he wrote a whole book about it in 1995.
Exactly, and yet in the interview, in the Joe Rogan Experience discussion, he was able to sort of completely put that to one side. You know, I'm not trying to say that these people didn't do this. I'm not trying to say he's even able to try and step back from the importance of very prominently talking about people with beards, for example, doing this work, apparently going around as megalithic missionaries. And he even goes so far as to say, in a 4.5-hour conversation, at times, we don't have time to talk about this. Let's move on.
I wrote down one quote that he said. You know how they say every accusation is a reflection of what the person is saying. This projection is so extraordinary. There was one point where he said, "You're very slippery," and I'm like, "Ooh, some projection! How exciting!" That was Hancock saying that to Dibble. And there was another quote where he said, "I don't know what to make of it. I'm not saying that Egyptians went to Central America, but maybe they share an ancient civilization that was ancestral to them both. But I'm not saying, but maybe." And so there's this, don't put words in my mouth. I would never say something so silly, but it doesn't really matter, because what his discussion is all about is the fetishization of apocalypse. Whether that apocalypse is a lost civilization on Mars, whether that apocalypse is this, this pre-Younger Dryas people that infiltrated hunter-gatherers. It's all about these men who have this knowledge that we can get to, that we need to get to, that especially now that we find ourselves, because I think right and left would all agree that we're perched on the edge of something big as a human species, but we don't exactly know what that is or what form it will take, because we cannot read the future. But everyone would agree, yes, this is what we're dealing with. This perspective is fetishizing the apocalypse and on a reboot again and again and again in multiple different ways. And that's one reason he can be so slippery. It doesn't matter if it's about aliens or Atlantis. He doesn't even have to name it. So if it denigrates his position to go ancient aliens, then he'll drop it and say, I would never. Or to go giants with beards, I would never. But look at this stone that I risked my life to find at the bottom of the ocean with my beloved wife. I can prove to you that I have connected myself to this lost knowledge that we all need, and we need it now more than ever. And that's the kernel of all of this.
And there's also, I suppose, something sort of reassuring for people who are comfortable in terms of the status of knowledge, and in that sense patriarchal structures, and the presumption that a certain type of person with a certain type of voice from a certain type of place has authority. And I think Hancock does benefit from those things, certainly in how he presents himself.
I mean, his accent was way better than Flint Dibble's. Is it a New York sort of? I mean, he's got a wonderful accent, Dibble does, but it in comparison to Hancock's.
And in that sense, we're all trained, and that again, we're trained to think that's authoritative. But the point is, what I find fascinating is that there's something about this thread of apocalypse that's also reassuring that, don't worry, guys, the best of us will survive.
Yes,
our ideas
we got
will continue.
This. Listen to us, understand where this is going, know that we've got this knowledge, and we will be able to make it forward. We will embed ourselves in the future hunter-gatherers of the world. Just bring your AR-15 and you've got it.
Yeah. Also, again, I just want to reiterate for the folks at home, we're not criticizing the man in an ad hominem way. We are criticizing his ideas, and if his ideas are lacking and his evidence is not there, then he's open to critique. We've touched on aspects that possibly, the bad, I guess, broadly speaking, you could say, or the questionable. What were the real positives for you guys from this 4.5-hour marathon that they conducted? Do you think that there were, people are always looking for the knockout blow, aren't they? But I'm not sure. Again, how do you knock something out that doesn't exist? You can't. As you say, it's a mythology that's being debated here as much as anything else. But what were the positive takeaways for the presentation of archaeology, the actual presentation of how archaeologists actually think about the world, and also the fact that we are in fact open to discussion about evidence, despite Hancock's attempt to attach himself to former academic arguments about people's evidence. What do we reckon? Shall we start with you, Andy, and then go over to Kara?
Okay. In terms of positives, it has created a very significant cultural moment for archaeologists, at least, and it's made, I think, a number of archaeologists think, it's concentrated minds think, what, we're faced with this. We there's been a lot of complaints, and there's complaints on constant complaints on archaeological social media about why we ignored, why did the press ignore us, why aren't our views taken, why when these documentaries are made don't they ask us? As you know, it's because basically people don't understand, they're not taught how the media works.
But also on that point, very briefly, at this particular moment, I would say it's because also for an awful lot of people, even the most obviously archaeological thing is not necessarily archaeology. So, for example, the Stonehenge tunnel conversation, that's a conversation about shared landscape and a civil engineering project. It's not about archaeology and archaeologists.
Absolutely.
For the public.
Absolutely. And again, that's the point I was making right back when we started, that archaeologists are wonderful, skilled, scholarly people, but by and large, but we are not very good, very often, at putting ourselves in a political, social, cultural context, because we're not taught how to, or even worse, we're taught to avoid it because it somehow sullies the science. And I think if events like Flint debating Graham on Joe Rogan makes people more open to that, engaging in this kind of discussion in public spaces where the public actually wants to come and hear, as Kara's been saying and you've been saying, there is a huge audience for this stuff. But I think there's a point I would like to make in the end about potential audiences and actually how effective this can be, but maybe but that's sort of a bit separate to this particular thread of the argument. So maybe Kara, what do you reckon in terms of positives?
Yeah, I thought there was a lot of a positive material in there. I've been asked to go on Ancient Aliens about 8 times, and they keep writing me and they keep saying, please, will you come on? And I keep saying, I will never be on your program. I'm not ever going to do it. And that's because I know they will edit me in a way that doesn't serve me. And it's putting myself into complete their hands in a way that I refuse to do. The reason this worked for me, this Dibble versus Hancock debate, is while there is editing possible on a podcast, you can tell that there's very little of it. They had a bathroom break. Otherwise, there were great giant pauses as we waited for the next HDMI slideshow to come up.
Or airdrop,
And that was really great because it wasn't this slick production of a History Channel or Nat Geo Channel type thing in which you can make somebody say what you want them to say. And I think that was really good. It was really good to see both men thinking on their feet and presenting their audience and getting upset and I loved that part of it. I thought it was authentic and real and important to see that. I think it's why podcasts are so popular right now, because people lack authenticity in their media, and particularly their historical media. So they want to just hear people hemming and hawing as they discuss these things with a friend over a radio, or over a microphone, right? Now, there were a couple of points where I think Flint hit some real blows, and one was the portion about the pyramids, in which he had done his homework about the mathematical sorts of arguments that people make to prove that there was this ancient Younger Dryas race of men who had this extraordinary knowledge. And he's like, this is just the math of the earth, guys. And this is how it works. And he explained it in a way that I could understand. I'm no mathematician. I was like, well, that was really well done. So we took all of these people going, oh my God, they have this and it's the circumference of that. And he's like, yeah, because we're on the earth and you can do that with, if you take any number, it's going to work. And I was like, boom, that was pretty cool. I also thought it was really nice when he would look at something and go, yeah, I don't think that's necessarily man-made. Things that, that are natural can create straight fissures. And he kept on that point, which I think was useful. Yes, would it have been nice if he brought up the Giant's Causeway? Sure, but he didn't, and that's okay. Or something like that, right? A little more analogy, I think, could have been useful for the audience, but it's a fast format, and you've got to be on your feet. I think one place where he really did hit a kind of death blow that approached the ideology but didn't really get there was when he said, and I'm quoting but not, that you're essentially going around the world telling people that their own ancestors didn't do these things. And I thought that was a real punch to the gut, because that is indeed what Hancock is doing. And that does indeed approach the ideology that Hancock is espousing in this fetishization of apocalypse. And, we're going to be able to save the seeds and the seed bank and all of these things. And this devaluation of what ancient peoples did, particularly in the Americas, where there is much more of a recent cultural memory of this antiquity. So, I thought that he had to engage in the particularism that was demanded, and anytime that he tried to rise above it, there was a great pushback, a moral indignation that was laid on pretty thick. And I think that there were ways of going after the white supremacist argument without saying the words white supremacist. Calling somebody a racist will always get you that reaction. And there are ways of calling somebody racist without outright calling somebody racist.
In the piece I wrote about after the interview, I quoted there's that wonderful gag in the Simpsons movie about Fox News. We've got the Fox News blimp going across, and it's not racist, but #1 with racists. And it's that kind of distancing, isn't it, that we're seeing. I mean, I'd like to throw just one more or two more really quick thoughts into the discussion, as I guess we're probably starting to wind up now. And that is, firstly, that when we did Joseph Vaz of Burma, I read a lot of because that was it was a much more contained story than the one that Graham Hancock punts. It's about a very particular place and time that we were able to show couldn't have happened in the way that it was being claimed to have happened. But we came across all the tick boxes that you see in, for want of a better word, conspiracy belief. The belief in the kind of things that Hancock is punting, but also kind of things that the alt-right are punting about color, about science, and so on and so on and so on. And that is that there's something like 20%-ish of the population that is psychologically susceptible to conspiracy theory. That's been shown by recent research since this has become an issue.
I think broadly it's 16 to 20%.
Yeah, exactly. Around about a fifth of the population is susceptible to this stuff, whatever you say. And in fact, if you do try to counter it, and I can speak from personal experience that this is absolutely the case, that if you show them evidence that what they believe can't have happened, they just see you as part of the conspiracy.
You didn't dig deep enough, Andy. That's what it is.
Exactly.
You didn't go to Burma and literally excavate 50 meters down. You should have done that. You weren't committed enough.
That's exactly the point. And so if we believe that science, if we accept that science, we have to accept that this is a dragon we can't slay. It's a dragon.
And I wouldn't try to.
No,
I wouldn't
exactly.
try to. Like, to go in there and to say, oh, well, this is wrong and that's wrong. You don't have any evidence for it. You come in there as this curmudgeon who doesn't believe in new discovery. You come in there as this unimaginative person who can't even talk about ideology and belief. And there's no reason to do that. We don't have to go in there and say, there was nothing interesting before the Younger Dryas or before the agricultural revolution and the Fertile Crescent. We don't have to do that. There's all kinds of amazing shit out there that we can talk about and that we can hypothesize about and say, oh yeah, people could have done this or that. And we can talk about religion and mythology, I think, in a way that is more open. It's the gotcha part of the argument that drives me mad. Like, I was just on a podcast that really made me angry, so angry that I told the guy not to air it. And he presents me with all of these, it's another patriarchal discussion. He presents me with all of these hieroglyphic readings of the black land and then the black people and the black cow, and was trying to get me to say that these were black people. And I'm like, why? It's either the people of the black land or the black people. And I'm not going to, this is a patriarchal Afrocentrist argument of claiming the area for black people, instead of understanding this as a gradient of African, Mediterranean, and West Asian peoples. And I'm not going to do it. So in a way, you have to kind of take your toys and go home and say, I'm not going to play that game. I'm going to play a different game. But when you're put into this kind of arena, how much you play along with it. Flint played. And we have to respect him for doing that, because he played the gotcha argument. He got in there and did something that I just told the guy I wasn't going to do. I'm like, I'm not going to play this stupid bullshit game that you're trying to set me up to lose. I'm not going to do it. Flint did. And I think that's pretty damn extraordinary. And I think that's why he probably won some converts. And it's something that I would rather transcend and not play in that messy sandbox.
I think, again, just to answer my own question about positives, I think that is the biggest positive, is that Flint did it. Flint was consistent in wanting to do it, despite, as we heard from him, literally getting a confirmation of a resurgence of cancer the day after it was announced that it was going to go ahead. So that hence there was a delay. It's commendable, and for the most part, yes, he did a good job. And the only reason that I critique aspects of the job is that I think some of it was a little bit knowing to other archaeologists. Other archaeologists, I think, can praise it because we kind of know what he means by not just the jargon, but also what he means, what the significance of certain ideas actually are, this kind of thing.
But Hancock put him into that. Hancock wanted to use those terms. Hancock wanted to throw the jargon around to show his authority, so that he was able to master this topic,
like magnetomic dating techniques and this kind of thing.
So Flint's got to come at that with that same weapon, that same weaponry.
And in that sense, I feel as though he definitely. Another really good aspect of the conversation were in terms of, striking a blow or whatever, or making a point, was to do with the fact was what we do and can find in the archaeological record, and essentially the fact that you see in ice cores when lead smelting begins with the Romans. We find. I mean, I said to Andy, because when I was listening to this conversation, folks at home, I was angry. Like about an hour in, I was like, "This is really." At times it was a slog. But that's because it was a marathon, in that sense. But I really wanted just something simple, like a really simple point to be made. Like, guys, we find stone tools from millions of years ago. Why aren't we finding your pre-existing civilization any evidence of it at all? Any structures or so on and so forth. And I think he did get close to that when he talked about the fact that we do find, for example, hunter-gatherer evidence. In all these places which are supposedly flooded in a single cataclysmic event, again, the presentation of which Hancock seems to suggest happens over the course of like a year at most, I think. And actually, I saw an awful lot of people saying that was their most convinced moment as well. Was actually what you had was Flint saying, "Well, we've looked, and this is what we find in this section of time that you're asking us to consider." And all Hancock could say, and again, this is where it comes down to him as a journalist and as a pseudo-archaeologist, he wants to crack the case. All he could say was, "Yeah, but we haven't, we don't know what we might find in other places." There was no evidence being presented. And this, however, given that I'm talking about positive, this, however, is why I come back to this question of the premise of the debate. It was a guy with lots of evidence, at times very niche evidence, debating someone with no evidence and holiday snaps. That it was an interesting... He
risked his life for those pictures.
He risked his life for those holiday snaps, exactly.
Don't denigrate those pictures.
No, exactly. No, I shouldn't. No. But I suppose as we are, I mean, as Andy has suggested, maybe we should try and get this to be like an hour and a half long. So go, maybe another 10 minutes. I have a question, and I'm asking this question partly, because Kara's here as our guest, but also I was thinking this before, actually, because we were going to have we were spitballing any sort of, who might we approach? And I think Kara's particularly good a guest for this question. Why did it have to be a man stepping up? Now, I'm not saying that to get brownie points with aspects of the audience. I'm asking the question because I think it might be connected to the same reason why I find it really hard to find women and female academics who want to appear in interviews, for example. But why? Why was it men debating this? I mean, obviously Hancock is one of the parties, but it was a very, as they might say, it was a sausage fest, the room, wasn't it? What do you think, Kara?
When I was watching this, it's interesting that you're saying that you got so angry because you were obviously watching it thinking of what you would say, right? We are specialists of the field. I watched it in the same way, Marc. It's no different. I watched it in the same way, but I had a different reaction in that I was like thinking, would I have been able to come up with such a quick answer? I'm not as quick on my feet with evidence as some. And I was like, oh my God, this with the HDMI and finding this or that. I don't think I could have done that. No. And I don't think I could have prepared for this with the particular slant that he did. And so that's why and then you're asking me a gender-based question about gender power in this patriarchal arena. And we can remember that men are harmed by patriarchy too. Boy Scouts of America and the Catholic Church have proved that point. But if I had gone into that arena, I would have been cognizant of my age as a woman who has reached her era of less value in this space. I would have been aware of my hair. I would have been aware of makeup and how I looked. It adds a whole other demand of a woman to go into this space. Yes, there are women who don't give a shit about what they look like, but the patriarchal structure demands that women put in a modicum of effort to appear in such media performances that men do not have to do. So Flint could show up with his shirt that was too big and his hat and his, put the headphones on and not care about what he really looked like, because a man can get away with that. In this patriarchal system. If a woman had done that, and one reason I don't do YouTube for my podcast is because the amount of comments I get about my appearance, my co-hosts' appearances who are women, is so much that we just can't handle it. Actually, we don't want to. We want to just be voices in intellectual space. And so to go into that and have the appearance then take over is something that it's an unspoken everywhere kind of discussion. So I think sending a man into that room in many ways was the right thing to do, because otherwise it would have been made about the woman herself. I think. Why are you interested in this? What's how many times am I asked why I study these ancient people? A question that would not be put to a man, I dare say, as much. Right? Yes, people ask you why you do this, but to me, they're like, oh, why do you study these ancient people? Isn't that sweet that you do this? But why? And this lack of understanding, because couldn't I be cared for in a patriarchal regime in a much more easier way with much less effort? So, I think that, again, fighting fire with fire, sending a man into the room makes sense. But, one thing I do have a problem with, which is taking a bit of a right turn from your question, Marc, is to go in there and then have it be man who is pseudo-archaeology and man who is scientific archaeology implies that we have it all figured out, implies that there is this certainty about what it is we are doing when we are anything but certain about how things happened using the very incomplete data that we have. And I wanted, like when you got angry at certain points, I wanted to scream, and as they got to the pyramids, to say, we don't know how they were built. Say it. We don't know. Okay. We don't know. That's okay. That's part of their power. There's anything wrong with that. And I myself have been called a pseudo-archaeologist for listening to to theories like Jean-Pierre Houdin, who talks about the inside out pyramid, that the outer walls of the pyramid were built first and there was this ramp on the inside. So there's no evidence for ramps either surrounding the pyramid or a big long kilometer ramp going off of it. It makes sense they would put outer structures and then have a ramp on the inside that we cannot see to build this structure. But Egyptologists can't figure this out. And plus the guy's coming from outside of the field as an architect, and how dare he? And so we throw around these terms pseudo-archaeology ourselves. We invent them and we shoot ourselves in the foot when we do that. And it's not like he's like, oh, there's no big archaeology. Of course there is. Hancock is right. There is a big archaeology. Yeah. We do like to toe the status quo. And there's, I mentioned Nick Reeves already, but I'd like to mention somebody like Maria Gambutas, who was totally taken down by Ian Hodder and Lynn Meskel, and really cruelly taken down as a silly woman with silly ideas of a prehistoric matriarchy, which is not what she ever said, but her ideas were completely misrepresented and made silly by Hodder and Meskel in a way that was able to cancel somebody, really cancel someone. Yeah. So we are capable of doing these things. The less we go into this space with that intent to cancel, and the more we go into such spaces with the intent to have a conversation of curiosity and awe, the better we are. But it's not an easy thing to do. It's not an easy thing to do.
No, I'm absolutely with you there, Kara. One of the discussions I'm often having, and one of the views I'm often putting forward, is that archaeology, deep down, is not a confident discipline. When we don't have the confidence in ourselves, as the word you use, storytellers, so we have to pretend we're scientists, and what we do isn't a pure science.
No, it's scientifically informed, certainly. But actually, it's interesting, this point about Hodder. Good God. I mean, like, the domestication of Europe, folks at home, and especially if you're a student from a European university, you probably had to read that book. It's treacle, and it's like scat poetry in places where he's like, maybe the book's writing me, maybe, and yet he's not taking
you wanted some post-structuralism. You got it, man. Here we go.
But that's the point. Like, if he was, and this is why I mentioned this question about
it's why like he and Hancock should get a room.
Yeah, well, yeah, quite possibly, but in that sense, this is why I bring up this question of why not a woman. Is that if Hodder, in that context, was a woman writing that kind of, in that way, about actually patriarchy at Lepensky Vir, for example, he would be as dismissible as we see him dismissing others. And this is why I'm curious about this question, is that I don't think it's a matter of just Flint having put himself out there and therefore, that's why he was chosen. I think it's because there's a broader societal question. There's definitely an archaeological cultural question, an academic cultural question as to why it is and how it is we perceive authority. And then, of course, as you say, Kara, just the simple fact that, I never get comments about my appearance on my YouTube videos. Maybe that's a bad thing, I don't know. But certainly, I have, obviously you, but also other friends and colleagues who do social media and YouTube, and if they're women, people talk about what they look like. Yeah.
And you better bring it. You better bring it. If you go on and you're not going to put some effort into it, that's all you'll get in the comments. That is a woman's value in a patriarchal space. And we can never forget that. Can never forget that. It's everything. So, yeah.
And I just want to note for people at home, here we are actually criticizing archaeology, folks. And as Kara said, Hodder was right. Don't clip that, though.
No, wait, oh my God.
Yeah, exactly. No, it's all right. You'll be able to say it was out of context. Any final thoughts? Is there anything that we haven't felt that we've been able to say in this conversation, or that hasn't come up in this conversation? Shall I start with you, Andy, and then go to our guest? So, Andy, what anything you'd like to say?
Okay, the very last point, and we've just been in the upper reaches of sort of the academic archaeological, a priesthood, if not Sadon, in terms of Ian Hodder, but also the upper reaches of archaeological theory, which is one of the things that puts I remember sitting at a conference once and listening to a paper, and a very experienced academic, far more experienced than I am, turned to me as he invited questions and said, "What was that all about?"
Yeah. Yeah, never mind upper reaches, up your own fundaments at times. Yeah, definitely.
Exactly. So we're our own worst enemies sometimes. But I think what I'd like to pull it back to is the cultural and media context, and the fact that we can't expect. Flint did a brilliant job. Yes, we can pick. We can pick up certain points, but on the whole, it was a remarkable. It was an achievement. It was an achievement. It was a remarkable event. I think both sides are the better for it having happened. But all I would say is we've been here before. Quarter of a century ago, the BBC made a Horizon documentary called Atlantis Reborn, and it was about it was aired in 1999, just coming up to the millennium. It was about Graham Hancock's theories, and with Robert Bauval, and as a result, the BBC the BBC program, both of them, Hancock and Bauval, complained to the then Broadcasting Standards Commission, which was the British broadcasting regulator, which who could criticise and ask for programmes to be re-edited or even withdrawn. We don't have the same First Amendment protections that obviously the States has. British broadcasters can find themselves in serious trouble if they appear to misrepresent or libel somebody. Anyway, so they made multiple complaints to the Broadcasting Standards Commission, and eventually the adjudication came down. And I'll just pick one of the claims and what the Broadcasting Standards Commission said, and it said the complaint that Hancock made was that the program had created the impression that he was an intellectual fraudster who had put forward half-baked theories and ideas in bad faith, and he was incompetent to defend his own arguments. And the Broadcasting Standards Commission found the Commission finds no unfairness to Mr. Hancock in these matters. That's nearly a quarter of a century ago, and we're still arguing about him and his theories now because he's still out there. He was found out years ago, but the political, social, media climate means he can still thrive, and I think we have to be realistic about that.
Okay. What about you, Kara?
Yeah, I like that we've been here before, but I'm gonna go further back and make it a we've been here before. And I mentioned my girl Hypatia, and I'm gonna mention her again. This idea that we have science versus mythology, but it's more than that. It is within the patriarchal structure that much of this needs to be taken down. And so my question to all of us is, what do we do? What do archaeologists do? What is next? And do we continue with the Society of American Archaeology, write a letter to Netflix saying you must put this into the science fiction category and publish this letter, make it an open letter? I mean, is that the way we want to do it? I ask this out of genuine curiosity as I am fighting power within my own university system. And today the academic senate will have a vote of no confidence against Chancellor Jean Block. And will that vote pass? And does it even matter? Because if it does pass, no one has to fire him. He doesn't have to resign. He doesn't have to step down. It's just a way of saying that we are unhappy with our situation. An SAA letter is very much the same. So what do we have available to us as archaeologists, as thinkers, to deal with this issue? Because I think we need to hit the moment that we're in. I think that the moment is in the moment that people desperately are hungry to talk about because of their fear of what they know is coming or what is already here. We need to return to grand narratives. And in our academic fear, we have run away from the grand human narrative and delved with both feet into this particularism and the safety that it affords us and the ability to fight with each other with this jargon-esque word or about that particular aspect of a particular subject. But if we don't go where the public needs us to go and have these conversations about what is coming from what we have seen before, then we are nowhere. And that is, I think, what people are most afraid to do. And it is what one is most easily criticized for in a scarcity mindset academia, because as they keep cutting departments and cutting jobs, we're all worried about where our cheese is going to be moved to next and protecting ourselves. And there's very little sticking one's neck out to make a big, bold statement about what the hell is happening in the human species writ large, right? So that's I'm really asking, what is it that we do? What is it that we deal with as we see humanistic academia crumbling into non-funding, lack of funding, and that there is at the same time this extraordinary interest in the same topics that we are studying? We must run to them. We must go there and try to have conversations with people with as much curiosity and interest as we possibly can, and as little combat you're going to combat the situation. You can't help it. And you're going to be put into a situation like I was just the other day. No, it doesn't mean Black people. It means people of the Black land. How many times do you want me to say it? Because somebody has an a priori agenda. But I think that I'm just going to end by saying we have to hit the moment, and we have to think about why we devote our lives to studying ancient dead people with a very limited amount of data, and what the hell it's all for, and why people are asking us, well, but what does it mean, and what is happening, and what's going to happen next? I think we need to be more brave about facing those questions with some answers that come from our own authority as scholars.
It's interesting. At the moment, there's a new Lara Croft Tomb Raider game being developed, and I am fascinated by this because the developers have said that they're moving away from her as a raider and towards a seeker of truth, and it's this idea of the reason why. Going back to weird fiction of H.P. Lovecraft, and then up through the serial adventures, and then to people like Indiana Jones and Lara Croft, this idea of grand stories is appealing, and it's mythology, and it roots us, and it gives us a tapestry to connect ourselves to in some capacity. And it's interesting that I've seen pushback actually from other archaeologists, in fact. On this Lara Croft thing, saying, well, she's not going to be a raider of tombs. That's just, what does that mean? How can we comprehend, whereas actually I think what you've described there, Kara, is not a necessity to go back to a sort of a Bea Gordon child kind of trying to answer questions with evidence for certain. This pottery is here, therefore these people moved to here, as opposed to presenting the tapestry in a way that takes advantage of all of the possible colours and threads and weaves and opinions and fellow academics and perspectives as possible, so that it is useful, as you say, useful for people. And the very fact that essentially what archaeology is yes, a constant search for new evidence and newness in the past, so that we understand the past hopefully a little bit better.
But haven't we seeded? We have seeded the grand narrative.
We have
completely. We have seeded the storytelling completely. We have made the storytelling associated with the pseudo-archaeology rather than claiming it ourselves and telling our own stories. And that is beyond frustrating. This is just the medium. The medium is not evil. But within academia, how many times are you told, well, you can't say that. You don't have the evidence for that. But what can we say then? What can we actually, aren't we here to talk about people and what we're doing to the earth and what we have done to the earth and how we failed before and where we're going, and that we have to reclaim that in my opinion.
And in that sense, and as I was just about to sort of to go on to, was the fact that we have in that sense a whole spectrum of case studies for what's happened in the past, for how people are ingenious in their solutions to challenges, and that is a grand narrative, and we should be proud of it. Yeah, definitely. We have gone beyond our 1.5 hours. So I just want to say thank you as ever, Andy, for your time. Thank you very much indeed, Kara, for your time. It was extremely short notice when I emailed you last week. But I'm just, frankly, I'm thrilled that you even considered turning up at such short notice. So thank you very much. Good luck with what's happening at UCLA at the moment. Obviously, it's on the news globally.
Yeah.
And hopefully that grand narrative will find its way forward in our collective story.
May we live in interesting times.
I'm told that actually isn't a genuine.
I've had enough. I've had enough of it. No more interesting times.
I understand. I think if you check it, that's fake news as well. It's not actually an old Chinese proverb. Somebody invented it not that long ago. But anyway, it makes a very good point.
We are facing a general election, and I'm so tired.
It's all going to get so much more shitty. It's going to get so much more shitty, so much more shitty. And I'm going to keep saying, why are we trying to solve 20th dynasty problems with 19th dynasty solutions? I'm going to keep saying that. Doesn't matter.
I was just thinking, Carl, I don't know about you, but I was taught by teachers and academics who were partly from that 1968 generation. And the person that taught me French was in Paris for Les Événements in May 68. And
and these are the ways we're combating this. It's not going to work. It's not going to work this time. And the crackdown is real. So we have to come up with other workarounds. There are ways to work around these institutions. We can figure it out. There are ways to create something that is anti-patriarchal. We can do it. We just have to figure out some clever things. Some clever things.
And being open to appearing in places like the Joe Rogan podcast is one of those things.
Yeah, it is.
Definitely.
It is.
Well, thanks for everyone watching at home as well. Please do feel free to comment below. Keep the comments, not about my appearance if you can. Try not to. I know I haven't done much with my hair today. But also keep them respectful and on point. As I say, we very specifically, and I always just naturally find myself very specifically criticizing Hancock's lack of evidence and that slipperiness that Kara alludes to as well. I'm not interested in his personal life at all. I'm interested in what it is that he's presenting, and as much as Andy talks about the cultural event, I think we also need to give him the credence of actually listening to what he's claiming and weighing and balancing it, and hopefully we can do that with each other in the comments below as well. We're going to keep on rambling on if I don't shut this down, so I'm just going to say bye everyone. Until next time, take care, and thank you guys for turning up. Cheers. Bye.
Thank you.